You should practice good housekeeping at all times. You are responsible for your work area. The job is not complete until it is returned to the condition in which you initially found it. Failing to follow good housekeeping practices may disqualify your company from future work. A safe work permit is a detailed hazard assessment of any task being completed on our site. Contractors working at this site on a particular task are required to obtain a safe work permit to perform work at this location. A safe work permit is only valid on the day that it is issued and must be authorized by a Chemtrade site representative before it is considered valid. It is important that you fully review and understand the work permit before beginning the work. This permit is used to identify the specific hazards with your job and ways for you to avoid risks such as injury or chemical release. Contractors are required to close out and sign the safe work permit before leaving the site. Personal protective equipment. In addition to the minimum PPE requirements for entering the site, additional PPE may be required when your safe work permit is issued. The PPE requirements for working where there is a risk of exposure to sulfuric acid or other corrosive materials includes a hard hat, chemical safety goggles, steel-toe chemical-resistant boots, chemical protective clothing, chemical-resistant gloves, and a face shield. Site policy is hearing protection is required when noise levels exceed 85 decibels. A good rule of thumb is to wear hearing protection if you need to raise your voice to speak to someone standing within 2 feet of you. Hearing protection is required if working in a posted high-noise area or when operating noisy equipment. Where a worker is expected to be exposed to respiratory hazards, the worker must wear suitable respiratory protective equipment for the job task and must be trained, fit tested, and medically qualified for using the respirator. All persons using a tight-fitting respirator facepiece shall be clean-shaven. Your Chemtrade site contact may request documentation to verify compliance with this policy at any time prior to allowing a person to work in a hazardous atmosphere at our site. Hot work permit. All hot work requires a permit, which must be authorized and issued by a Chemtrade employee. Hot work is any activity within the plant property which could produce a spark or ignition or cause a fire or explosion. Before work begins, all combustible materials must be removed. The atmosphere will be monitored to assure that the oxygen concentration of the air is safe for the work and that no flammable gases or harmful vapors exist. If a fire watch is required, the fire watch must be designated on the site hot work permit. The fire watch must be equipped with at least a 10-pound ABC fire extinguisher or 20-pound ABC fire extinguisher if working near combustible materials. Fire watch must be trained on use of the fire extinguisher, continuous air monitoring equipment, and must remain in the work area for at least 30 minutes following the completion of the hot work. At the completion of all hot work, the area operator must be contacted to perform a final inspection of the work area. It is important to use a face shield and protective lenses during any work involving welding or grinding. All portable grinding wheels and other portable work tools must be equipped with the appropriate guards to minimize the risks to a worker in the event that the grinding disc shatters or the tool kicks back. Confined spaces. If your work requires you to enter any tank, vessel, pit, or other space not designated for continuous occupancy, you will be required to follow Chemtrade's confined space entry procedures. Entrance attendants and entry supervision shall have the required training. Written documentation of the necessary training shall be available upon request. A confined space entry permit may only be issued after it is determined that the entry conditions are acceptable and that the appropriate rescue procedures are in place in case of an emergency. Prior to entering any confined space, a pre-entry briefing must be conducted, and it is mandatory that your Chemtrade site contact be included in the briefing. All confined space entries will be conducted in accordance with all applicable legal requirements for the site, such as OSHA or provincial regulations. Without having a properly executed Chemtrade confined space entry permit and pre-entry briefing, you may not enter into any confined spaces. A debriefing shall be held with contractors at the completion completion of the entry to review entry practices. This shall be documented on the entry confined space permit. Continuous monitoring of conditions within the space is required. Monitoring equipment shall be calibrated and bump check conducted prior to each use. Mechanical retrieval lines connected to a full body harness shall be utilized whenever feasible. Vertical entries 5 feet in depth shall also require a self-retracting lifeline or other fall protection system. Anchor point for lifeline shall hold 5,000 pounds static load per person. Suitable rescue equipment such as extra body harness, SCBA, lifelines, etc. shall be readily available at the site of the entry. The required rescue equipment shall be appropriately documented on the entry permit. Standard entry requires continuous monitoring of oxygen, LEL, carbon monoxide, and hydrogen sulfide. Certain spaces may require additional monitoring. Required monitoring and acceptable entry levels will be specified on the entry permit. To determine required monitoring, consult your site contact. Safety equipment. All heavy equipment used on site, including forklifts, bobcats, man lifts, cranes, and other similar construction equipment, must be inspected prior to use. All persons using equipment on site must be trained in their use, and documentation of the training must be provided to Chemtrade. If you find a fault with any piece of equipment during your pre-use inspection, tag it out with a red "Do Not Use" tag and notify your supervisor. All equipment entering our site must be accompanied by inspection documents which show Chemtrade personnel that it has been inspected and is deemed safe for use. Rigging. All rigging equipment